this episode, we'll be looking at the Action Text, which is now merged into the Rails core. Action Text brings rich text content and editing to Rails. It is a WYSIWYG editor. Behind the scenes, it uses the Trix WYSIWYG editor. And having implemented rich text editing within some of my applications, I'm glad to see that this is making it into the Rails core because it can be a difficult thing to implement. So in this episode, we're going to look at adding in Action Text into an existing Rails 5.2 application. And because Action Text has already been merged into the Rails repository, we're going to be using the archive branch. However, I would not use this long term. I will get my application ready to upgrade to Rails 6 once it's released. Simply because this is not going to be maintained since it's now within the Rails repo. And to get started, I'll create a new Rails application and I'll just call this the template. And we will be using Webpack because Action Text is going to be pulling in the Trix editor and we'll need to use Webpack to tie in the JavaScript assets that it will be using. And once that's completed, I'm going to go ahead and generate a scaffold. And the scaffold that we'll create is an article. And the article will have a name. However, I'm not going to create the content text of the article yet because with Action Text, it's going to use a polymorphic association. So it's going to have its own table for all of the rich text. So whenever we use the helper on the article model to tie in the Action Text, then that'll create the polymorphic association link over to the other table where the rich content will be stored. So within the gem file, we'll add the gem Action Text. We'll then reference the GitHub link, and this is going to be under the Rails and then the Action Text. And because we're going to be using the archive branch, we need to specify the branch archive, and then we can require the Action Text. And because Action Text is going to be using the active storage for file uploads, we can also add the image processing to our gem file, so it'll be able to handle the image resizing. And within your console, you would want to do a brute install ImageMagick. But then we're also going to install Vips because this is going to be the image processor that's used later within Rails. So we might as well go ahead and install that, knowing that we'll be using it soon. However, because we are using a Rails 5.2 application, ImageMagick is what we're going to need initially. So once we get Action Text installed, we are going to have to change some of the view just so images will display correctly. However, because Action Text has already been merged into the Rails core, it's not going to work when we actually go to reference the JavaScript assets, so I've made a clone of Action Text that you can use under my GitHub page, cobalt/Action Text. We'll still reference the branch archive, but when we run bundle, it'll install the gem, and when you go to Rails and then the Action Text install, it will install the appropriate files so you can still use Action Text within your Rails 5.2 application. If you look under the known modules, then under Action Text, you can see that the files are within there, and before, if you were to just reference the Rails, then you would get the README saying that it's been merged into the Rails core. And so we can go ahead and run Rails DB migrate to migrate our database. Within the article model, we can create a has rich text, and then we can pass in a variable, and in this case, we're going to use the content. And because this content is then going to be something that's passed in through the form, we also need to go into the articles controller, and then update the whitelist parameters so that we're not only permitting the name, but then we're also permitting the content. And this is needed on the article parameters because when we go to create and update an article, we are passing in the article parameters, so it's going to reference to that method at the bottom of this controller. Within our form, I'm going to make a copy of this div class, and instead of name, we're going to use the content, and this is the same attribute that we created within our article model. The text field is now going to be a rich text area, and this should be the basics of what we have to do in order to add in Action Text into our application. And because this is a new application, we are going to have to go into our application.js file under the app JavaScripts packs application.js, and you'll see that we have the import action text that was inserted as a result of the install rate task that we ran. But we are going to have to copy the JavaScript pack tag application and move this over into our template. So under the views, layouts, and in the application HTML ERB, we simply just need to insert this into our head. And so now when we go to create a new article, you can see that we get the Tricks editor loaded in for our content. We can make updates to this text, and then we can create our article. And on the show page, if we want to show the content, that's simple enough. We can just update this view a little, and then we can just write the article.content. Saving these changes and then refreshing, you can now see we have our rich text. And if we were to paste in an image, you can see that we have our image pasted in, and it looks to be uploaded to our server. However, when we update our article, you can see that we have a broken image. And if we look at the console, you can see that we get a server error with the status of 500. And if you look at the error within the logs, it is around the mini-magic. And so because ImageMagick doesn't support this resize to fit, we will just simply relabel this as resize. And it also cannot take in an array of the resolution. Instead, we need to pass in the resolution as text, so we can do it 800 by 600. And same for the larger size, it would be 1024 by 768. And if you refresh the image now, you can now see we have our fancy text along with our image. So I wouldn't recommend using this long term in a Rails 5.2 application. It is something that you would want to update as soon as Rails 6 is released and you're sure that it works within your application. However, with that being a few months away, and if your application is up to date with the latest version of Rails, then you may want to consider cloning the action text repo that's still in archive and get that working for your environment. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for watching. For more videos, check out driftonruby.com.